everybody. If this is your first time seeing me wearing this, go here instead. That is the whole playlist. I recommend starting at the beginning with Dhammapada Part 1. If you definitely want to start with Part 1 of the Lotus Sutra, click here. Okay, hopefully those guys are gone now. For those of you who saw Part 7 and are watching Part 8, all right, okay, thank you. So, if you haven't seen Part 7, this might not make a lot of sense. So you might have noticed that I was a bit critical, and I was kind of having a bit of a... I'm going to be talking a little bit in this one. I intend to, make this a purely I'm reading to you, you can learn because it's like a book on tape, but also it's an organic thing. There's no real set rules with this. I'm making the rules for this series, so, if there were or are rules, then I, of course, can change them and break them at my will because, anyway, I know the boss, me. I try to make them about a half an hour, and generally speaking, I'm reading the sutras, or Buddhist books, as it were, in order by century, as best I can. Now, there's theories that the Lotus Sutra is from the 1st or 2nd century. If you have information about the time when the Lotus Sutra was written, I would be very interested to hear about that in the comments. Wikipedia, as we all know, is not 100% reliable, though I like it as a resource. Okay, so first, let me just read something to you. A friend of mine, Robbie, hi Robbie, if you're watching, wrote to me, he sent me this video and he wrote, another thing I've been grokking, pause, sidebar. If you don't know what that means, you haven't read Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. And I get it. Robert Heinlein these days is considered a bit problematic for his portrayal of women. Anyway, but he's a good sci-fi author. Lovecraft is, for example, a brilliant sci-fi horror writer and innovator who is also problematic for his racism. So, Beethoven, if you've seen Immortal Beloved, was very rude to his servants and so on and so forth. It's sad, but, true that most of the people that we admire in life and even make our heroes, oh my God, all the people who loved Bill Cosby, there's some who still insist on loving Bill Cosby, in a transcendental agape kind of level, then yes, we can love everyone, but not quite the same way as before. Anyway, all right, that's neither here nor there. What am I talking about? Yes, so, grok. To grok means to drink or to understand. So it's kind of like a little more than, it's like getting it, but it's like really absorbing it and going, yes, okay, this idea that you've given to me, I am one with now. I get it, to grok something. So grokking, they used it a lot in the 70s, when that book was sort of being read by everyone. If you haven't read it, it's a good read. Get the unabridged version. There's like an extra, I don't know how many pages, an extra 60, 80 pages or something, rather than the shorter one. Okay, because it was a little bit like, he was treading on some territory that people were like, this is a little too thoughtful, a little too controversial for the 60s. And so later they released the full version that included those parts. So, okay, this isn't about Robert Heinlein. This is about the Buddha and Buddhism. So my friend Robert, by the way, that's Robert Strong, PhD, Gonzo Theology. Check it out. Not right now, after you finish this. Good friend of mine. He wrote, another thing I've been grokking on is the Buddhist idea of their first man, a whole society of which Buddha was just the better known. So here was my response. I'm having to transition into thinking that way, or at least as a sort of suspension of disbelief paradigm shift as I delve into Mahayana. Otherwise, I'll just be stuck in rolling my eyes and saying Theravada is better. like the woman in episode 6 that I said, that according to this is not a true disciple. I was in episode 7, I was sort of talking and thinking like she does or did. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's okay. But if you watch these in order, then you will know what I'm talking about, unless you were like spaced out at times, like a little bit. All right. So continuing with what I wrote just an hour ago, it seemed that idea. Okay, what idea? It seemed the idea of that Buddha was a special example of that there were Buddhas before him, and everything he said, like the whole first 2 hours of the Lotus Sutra was Manjushri telling Maitreya that, there's been Buddhas before, and they've given Lotus Sutras before, and none of this is new. So I wrote, it seemed that idea, to develop sometime between Gautama Buddha and the 1st or 2nd centuries, assuming that's when this was written. But the thing is, the sutras were developed not by idiots, but devout, lifelong Buddhists, scholars, who, of course, did not have access to the knowledge, science, and archaeology we take for granted in the 21st century. And if we talk too much about the if I, in this series, if I talk too much about the bathwater, okay, a little sidebar, because sometimes I use expressions that aren't commonly known around the world, or maybe even aren't known by people under a certain age. There's an expression, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which basically means because there's some dirty water, you threw the baby out. That's not good, right? Like if you're throwing dirty water out the window, make sure you get the baby first, right? So what I'm kind of saying, it's like a metaphor, an analogy, an allegory. So people will say, because Lovecraft is a racist, I will have nothing to do with reading Lovecraft. You could say they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because, you can give other examples. I won't go through until I alienate someone. But yeah, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It can be said of Christianity with, the bathwater of the Crusades and the Inquisition and you name it, prosperity gospel and all that. And by the way, if you think I'm being hypocritical because recently I posted a poem talking about how the approach of worshiping Lakshmi is better than you cannot serve both God and money, and then like setting up this tight, rigid thing that somehow results in slavery and genocide in order to dominate the world through capitalism. You know what I mean? Whereas the Indian approach of, thank you, Lakshmi, for this wealth. I will use it for my health and my family and adorn your statue with gold. And if I drop money on the ground, I'll apologize to you because it's your physical form, and I'll touch it to my third eye. And kiss it. Don't touch your mouth with money if you want to start doing that. They just sort of near your mouth. Anyway, if you think I'm being a hypocrite by saying prosperity gospel bad, Lakshmi good, what I'm talking about with prosperity gospel is these guys in these giant, cathedrals that say, give me 10% or 50% or 90%, especially if you're old and senile, and you'll go to heaven. The treasures will come back to you. Not only that, but you'll prosper. If you give me money, then God will see that and make sure that your stock goes up or whatever, and you get money. That's what I mean by prosperity gospel, not going against the poverty mentality inherent in certain aspects of Christianity among people who emphasize that Jesus was a dirty hippie who was a beggar, and so therefore shall I be as well. You can make money, it's okay, but don't listen to those a-holes on Trinity Broadcasting. That's all I'm saying. Okay, I'm like making too many points when I'm really just trying to make one point. So I'll get back to it. Baby bathwater, right? The baby on the bathwater. Okay. If I talk too much about the bathwater on this channel, like I did in episode 7, people might hear me talking and give up on searching for the baby in it. I mean in my Buddhist books recordings, talking to Robbie. The idea that if the state of awakeness, Buddha means awake, the state of awakeness that Buddha means is universal and reachable by anyone, then it stands to reason that there are myriads of kotis of them, Buddhas, throughout the past, present, and future. Yet, that it is so difficult and so rare, it also stands to reason that there are times, ages even, when there is not one single Buddha present. Given that things repeat themselves, the sorts of themes presented in something like the Lotus Sutra, that it's all happened before, even exactly like this, Buddhas have said exactly what I'm saying before, and built stupas to other previous Buddhas before, end parentheses, I've been approaching it as a literalist historian, too focused on Gautama as being unique in all of time and space. I'm starting to grok the benefits of expanding beyond it offends me when people hundreds of years after he died write in his name things he didn't and never would have said. For one thing, if I can't accept Mahayana as it is, not as a dogma, but as a paradigm, there will be no hope for getting the Vajrayana Sutras when I finally get to those a few years from now. Because at the rate I'm reading, putting up a half an hour twice a week, it's going to take a few years before I actually get to the Vajrayana. Now, just a couple things. Again, I try not to make this about me, but I wanted to introduce you to my namesake. As you may know, my name is Edward. This guy's name is also Edward. See? See the resemblance? He's my grandfather, my mother's father. Now, you've heard me mention at the end of every episode that my father and I meditated together, and he taught me this meditation. So there you have a little bit of insight into the weird DNA that I am in, an unflowering of. So I've got my grandpa in me, and he raised me to be a scientist. He raised me to be, I won't say an atheist, but someone who questions things, and doesn't take anything that anybody says as truth until he's tested it himself. He's the sort of scientist that when he would receive the scientific newsletters, and it would say, okay, it's been discovered, it's been uncovered and peer-reviewed and everything, that when you mix this chemical with this chemical, it produces this chemical which can be used for this. He would say, go into his garage, get those chemicals, do the experiment himself, say, okay, yeah, it's as they say. Then he would do it again and again and again. And then until he was satisfied, before he accepted it as part of his sense of reality, which was always open to being updated if new evidence presents itself. So that's the sort of Rosicrucian, the sort of scientist he was. And so then my dad, on the other hand, was like, I'm getting that on the astral, in a former life, you and I were, like that, right? More like, kind of like these guys, right? And he wrote a book called Transformations, where he talks a lot about how everything's been done before, and there's a cycle, and it just repeats itself. And even the words I'm saying right now has been said before, and I've said it before, even to you, and blah, 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 blah. So he talks a lot like the Lotus Sutra talks. So anyway, why am I bringing that up? Just to kind of let you know where I'm coming from. And yeah, I mean, I guess to apologize a little bit. Okay, who's vibrating? I don't appreciate that. Anyway, yeah, again, I'm not trying to make this about...
The Bluetooth device is ready to pair.
Wow, that's obnoxious. Okay. I'll cut that out. But anyhow, did I say everything I wanted to say? I hope so. If I didn't, then I'll mention it, in episode 9. But for now, I've gone on a lot longer than I usually do at the beginnings of these. And thank you for your patience. Again, if you just want a straight reading of the Lotus Sutra, this is not the channel for you. If you're enjoying my approach of pure honesty as best I can, and a little bit of humor and lightness and this is a process for me too. So you get to watch me go through that process, and for whatever it's worth. I'll jump right in, right where I left off last time. Likewise, have all who caused jewel images to be made and dedicated, adorned with the 32 characteristic signs, reached enlightenment. I, for one, would like to know what these 32 characteristics are. Years ago, when I was like doing this kind of footnotey, goose chasing footnotes, as my dad put it, I found them and wrote them out, but I forget what they were. I think one of them is like the shape of your head and stuff, so it's kind of like, huh? But anyway, again, this was 2,000 years ago, so we'll give them a little bit of, grace. It was only 300 years ago that people were still getting excommunicated for saying it's today, people are still saying the earth is flat, so whatever, Okay. Others who had, if you're angry because I said that it's ridiculous to say the earth is flat, please comment below and tell all your friends to comment below. All right. Others who had images of Sugatas made of the 7 precious substances. What are the 7 precious substances? Comment below. Of copper or brass, have all of them reached enlightenment. I have a feeling one of them is lapis lazuli, because they're always going on about lapis lazuli and these. I think before, what's the name of that company that pure evil company that made diamonds what it is in the brains of people today? Back then, instead of gold and diamonds and platinum, people were talking about lapis lazuli and rose quartz and stuff like that. It's kind of sweet, All right, where are we? They reached enlightenment. All right, I'll accept it. It's the Lotus Sutra. It's the Lotus Sutra. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, right? Those who ordered beautiful statues of Sugatas to be made of lead, iron, clay, or plaster have. Those who made images of the Sugatas on painted walls with complete limbs and the holy signs, whether they drew them themselves or had them drawn by others, have attained nirvana. Those even, whether men or boys... Oh yeah, sorry, I wanted to tell you, because I haven't told you. As far as, there's the grandpa side that's very okay, really? Is this true? Is it really true? Is it really, really true? And then there's my dad, and they both kind of are in me, in a sense. I went to Bhutan. I'll try to make it short. I went to Bhutan, and I went to the Nyingma monastery in the valley, whose name I forget. It starts with a P. It's where the famous black neck cranes, the Tibetan cranes, fly back and forth between Tibet and Bhutan. And in the wintertime, I believe, they come to Bhutan. And they go 3 times around the Nyingma monastery before they land and do their thing in the field there. And there's good preservation societies making sure that people don't overbuild. Because basically, there's so many people like me that are interested in this stuff that they go over there and then, so tourism is kind of big there. And they try to limit the number of tourists because they can see India and Nepal, and they're like, let's not end up looking like that. They just opened their doors 20 years ago, 23 years ago. They didn't have TV or internet before that. So they're kind of new.
Thanks for using OUD product.
Right. Okay, so they're kind of new to the rest of the world, which is, I think it's beautiful because you can actually walk into a place that's in the mind of Padmasambhava, sort of like a Ghibli imagining of Tibetan, culture without the Chinese malls and everything that are in Tibet proper. But anyway, so what am I talking about? So I was there in Bhutan, and sharing my guide brought me to the Nyingma monastery. Nyingma means old school. It means ancient. So it refers to when Padmasambhava went to Tibet and he taught everything to Geshe Tsogyal, taught everything to Geshe Tsogyal, and then he got out of there. He's like a big monumental figure there, but I think it's important to remember. In fact, I'll refer you, I have a channel called What Would Geshe Do, dedicated to Geshe Tsogyal, the woman that Padmasambhava gave his teachings to, then got out of town, and then she became the one who was the head of what we now call Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhism. And that original form is called, nowadays it's called Nyingma. They didn't call it at the time because it wasn't ancient yet. Then later, all these other forms developed, and there's still smaller yogic lineages that we'll get into years from now when I get to the Ian Baker stuff and some of the other Nyingma and Vajrayana Buddhist texts. But anyway, so that's Nyingma. So there's some Buddhists there that are Nyingma. There's some monks there, in other words, in the monastery there. One of them made, I don't know if you can see behind Vimalamitra, there's a wood carving of the fish, the knots, and the lotus that was made by one of the monks there. I have a picture of me with him and everything, and he signed the back. So while I was there, we went into the monastery, we went into the temple, and then into like the sacristy. And, like I said, there's my grandpa and my dad both in me. So I'm not a fool, but here's what happened. They brought me in, and, I was talking to the monk. He spoke English pretty well, and kind of telling him where I'm coming from. And he brought this relic from somewhere, and it was covered in cloth, stitched cloth, so nobody ever opens it. And he said, this is the breastplate of Padmasambhava. And he had sharing, and I touch it. And, you could say it's placebo, you could say it's all in my head, but I felt, whoa, I felt like I had been initiated. I felt a connection. I felt, wow, I touched the breastplate of Padmasambhava that he gave to Tashi, I forget her last name, her surname. She was the dog keeper, the Himalayan dog keeper that in Bhutan they say is from Bhutan. And she was one of the students, Yabyum students, consorts they call them, but I think that's a little bit old-fashioned. So I call them students or partners, girlfriends of Padmasambhava. She was one of those, and so he gifted her his breastplate, and so it remained in Bhutan, and thus was kept in the ancient Nyingma monastery in Bhutan, in western Bhutan. Or so they say. That's my grandpa talking. So anyway, I touched it. I felt that connection. The monk that allowed me to have that experience, he was wearing this. He was wearing a robe exactly like this, except with a proper collar shirt underneath, with long sleeve, not like some kind of, jungly. Jungly, it turns out, is a Hindi word. Did you know that? There's so many words that came from Hindi when the British were here, and they brought them back, and it sort of took on its own meaning. And like pundits, we say pundits, meaning talking heads on TV, a specialist in a certain topic. But pandits is a priest. And what would happen is, like, the Jesuits and then later the British and scholars who were studying languages would sit with the pandits, because the pandits were expert in Sanskrit, and they would analyze, okay, what is this, what is this, what does it mean? And they discovered, basically through triangulation, they discovered Proto-Indo-European. They discovered that there must be an ancestor language to all of these languages, because there's just too many coincidences. Raja, royal, we, with, some other examples. There's a lot of examples of that. So, and Kent, or Kentum, or Centum, or meaning 100. There's just a lot. There's a lot of these like things that are like, whoa, this is extremely similar to Latin, Greek, not only that, but the ancient Celtic languages and the ancient Germanic languages. So there's a common ancestor of ancient Germanic, ancient Celtic, Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit. And so they figure that they were around 9,000 years ago in the steppes, which I think are in like Georgia or Romania. I'm revealing a little bit of ignorance in not knowing exactly where the steppes are, but that's where like domesticated horses came from, and later Genghis Khan. So it's like, first they domesticated horses and became the ancestors of everybody. Not everybody. That's, Proto-Indo-European centric thinking on my part. I apologize to the braided pot people who gave us words like horse. Anyway, okay, I'm not even reading the Lotus Sutra in this one, so I apologize that I barely even got to the Lotus Sutra in this one, because I wanted to tell you a few things. I wanted to tell you my reflections on how I was approaching part 7, and how I was not giving it much respect, and I was just sort of going, this isn't historically accurate, and then claiming that the Dhammapada was the real words of the Buddha, which it probably wasn't either. It was written at least a couple hundred years after the Buddha passed away, where the Lotus Sutra was written more like 700 or 800 years after the Buddha passed away. No one really knows what the Buddha actually said. The closest we can get would be the Pali Sutras. And this is something that is a debate that can be had within Christianity as well, where the red letter Christians, I guess fundamentalist isn't the right word, because even though the meaning of the word fundamentalist itself might apply, the people who call themselves fundamentalist Christians aren't red letter Christians always. They're more like, let's interpret Revelation according to this passage in the Old Testament and say that it's going to happen in 1863, and that's not exactly red letter, right? And I'm not counting the red letter text in the book of Revelation. It should change the color of that text. Anyway, that was John the Revelator on ergot that was growing on the... Well, okay, getting far afield. So the point is that in Philokalia and a lot of other texts, there were a lot of scholars, a lot of monks, a lot of people who did very deep work and very deep meditation and became healers and had insights. People like St. Francis. There are problematic aspects of St. Francis as well, and he's sort of one of the originators of the, better to lie about the corruption in the church rather than let people know that it's not perfect, because it should be perfect in their mind. It's like, okay, thank you for the prayer of St. Francis, and thank you for the, that Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon movie, and for the 14 Stations of the Cross, but we could have done without the let's cover up the corruption in the Catholic Church, please. My point being that there are other people besides Jesus who their legacy is not without value, that it's worth knowing about. And in my point of view now, as it's evolving, the Mahayana Sutras are an example of that. It's the, monks, scholar monks, standing on the shoulders, figuratively, of other scholar monks that all have been working together, focusing on Buddhist principles for, at that time, 700 or 800 years. And the product of what they thought was important to be said. And it's very interesting looking at it like that. As far as the cyclical nature, and there were Buddhas before and Buddhas before that, and not everybody's ready for the whole thing, and just tell them that they already know, so they go away, so that you can tell the people who are hungry for more knowledge. All these things are, just important to consider, I think. And we're already at a half an hour almost, so I apologize for not actually reciting any Lotus Sutra in this episode of Lotus Sutra. I'll make it up to you next time. I'll just jump right in and do nothing but reading. But I felt it important to... Did I finish the story about this robe? Yeah, so this isn't the actual... I didn't take the robe from the monk. I went to a store that sold things like monk robes. It's the same place where I got that flag, not where I got those, the 8, there's 4 on this side and 4 on that side, the 8 auspicious symbols. But these 2 flags for sure, the Tibetan looking ones, those are Bhutani. And I got those and this, paid for them. at a store in Paro, Bhutan. And they were all kind of like laughing, putting it on me, making sure it fit, showing me how to fold it, and then I forgot, and I kind of had to evolve and tap into primal memories of those 5 seconds that they showed me how to wear it and figure it out, because there aren't any like tutorials on wearing this type of robe online. So what you see is my figuring it out, I guess, but they did show it to me at one point. So that's where this comes from. So people who are wokists, I'm not saying that with any bile or any judgment or any, I'm just saying it's a thing. They may, according to their dogmas, see me as a white oppressor, culturally appropriating, Bhutani culture, and I understand that. I understand that you feel that way, and I see the truth in what you're saying, and I see the importance of pointing out things like that, given Elvis, right? And a few other, big examples of like really negative appropriations of other people's culture. It's not my intention to be like Elvis in that sense. I'm wearing this because I aspire to be more Buddhist. Also, I'm wearing this with, in my mind and heart, the words of Dogen, and he quoted other people. So when I say I'm quoting Dogen, I'm probably quoting someone else indirectly through Dogen, but he talked about that there was a woman who was a prostitute, and I know that these days that's fine, but, being a prostitute, it's fine. Hopefully it'll be legal in your country soon. I'm talking to the wokists, for you conservatives that are horrified by what I just said. Anyway, so there was a prostitute who saw a nun's robe, and she put it on and said, "Ha, look, I'm a nun," and then took it off. And as a result of her wearing that robe, just for a few seconds as a joke, she in her next life became a nun. And in the life after that, she became a nun. And in the life after that, if I'm not mistaken, she became a nun and attained nirvana. So, yeah, I'm not claiming to be a monk. I'm not planning to become a monk in this life, but I am wearing the robe kind of with that in mind, So I don't claim to be on the path. As Keanu Reeves put it, I am not what did he say? I don't practice the Dharma, but I am interested in it and drawn toward it, and I honor it, and I'm sorry if I was disrespectful to the Lotus Sutra, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, right? In episode 7, and I apologize for not reading any Lotus Sutra in this episode except for like one paragraph. So I will stop talking your ear off now and get to the prayer that my father and I used to pray every morning after our Nyingma Tibetan yogi meditations that he got from his guru. To the north and to the south, to the east and to the west, to the spirits of light among us, and to the spirits below, we send out our reverent love and compassion. May all beings be happy. May all beings be serene. May all beings be in peace. Until next time.